Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Elaine. Tell them what we're here for.
A true Unsolved Mysteries podcast.
And what's it called?
143 Mysteries.
No,
1 minute and 43 second mysteries.
Seconds.
Podcast. A true Unsolved Mysteries.
1 minute and 43 seconds.
Welcome, everyone, to 1 minute and 43 seconds. A true Unsolved Mysteries podcast.
I am your host with the most and some sourdough rye toast, Megan. And joining us today again for another episode, I'm delighted to have her back, is my good friend Elaine Erickson. Elaine, thank you.
Thank you for having me back. I am very happy to be here.
You're always welcome. In fact, I've toyed around with, hey, you should just be a permanent guest.
Oh.
But you can be a recurring one too. You know, we'll just play that by ear. But
yeah,
I enjoy talking to you about these things. And so I hope you enjoy it too. But this is going to be, believe it or not, this is our fourth episode together.
Yes, it is. Wow.
So our first episode, if you recall, was that of Brian Schaefer.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Disappeared from Columbus, Ohio in 2006.
Yep.
After a night out with friends. Literally walked into a bar and was never seen leaving.
Yeah, that was odd.
that was a two-parter. Then we did Andrew Gosden.
Yep.
Young man he disappeared in London. And we also did Aisha Degree for our Valentine's Day episode.
Mm-hmm.
So I have something a bit different for you today, Elaine. You've covered 3 unsolved disappearances with me.
Yes.
Today, what I have for you is a unexplained death.
Oh.
At least one that is very disputed on how this came about, how this person died.
Oh.
I haven't seen this covered a ton, but I have seen that it was covered on 48 Hours Mystery. Do you ever watch 48 Hours?
I have, yeah.
So they did a great episode on that, and I'll certainly link that episode because I found it to be a good source of info.
Okay.
But today we are talking about the suspicious death of Hugues de la Plaza.
Oh.
So this is Hugues.
How do you spell that name?
You spell it Hugues de la Plaza. And it's pronounced Hugues.
Hugues.
Okay. So Hugues was a French-American citizen. He had dual French citizenship and American citizenship.
Okay.
He was found dead on Saturday, June 2nd of 2007. So other than that 48 Hours Mystery episode, I haven't seen this talked about a lot. And I think it's a really interesting case. So I wanted to cover it.
Yeah.
So Hugues was 36 years old in 2007 at the time of his death. And as I said, he was a French-American citizen. He worked as an audio engineer at Leapfrog. Have you heard of Leapfrog?
No, like the technology company for children?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
It's like an educational toy and software company. So he was a sound engineer, audio engineer for them.
Okay.
And he apparently got along really well with his coworkers. He made some good friends there. He liked to travel. He liked art. And he was generally just a fun, happy guy to be around. He really loved women and he loved to party. So he would go out with his friends a lot from work. He liked to meet girls online. And, you know, he was just kind of a woman. Not a woman. I don't want to say a womanizer because I feel like that has negative connotations. I mean, he might have been a womanizer, but he just really liked women and liked to meet them. He was 36 years old.
Okay.
So basically, this was on the Friday, the day before he was found. Okay, June 1st, 2007.
Okay.
He actually had a date with somebody that he met online.
Oh.
But he apparently told his coworkers that the date, it went fine, but that, they're just going to be friends.
Oh,
so, sparks didn't fly.
I see. All right.
But anyway, later that night, Friday, June 1st, he went to Underground SF, which is a nightclub in San Francisco, which is where he lived, I should have said.
Okay.
And he was celebrating a promotion that he had recently received. Okay.
Okay.
So along with him, really loving women, his friends said that he would oftentimes really milk the whole being French thing to like impress girls because they often really liked his accent, and he was a good looking guy, so he really drew them in. So
I'm sure it worked.
It did, yeah. So that night,
guy.
right. So at the bar that night, everybody was having a good time, smiling, talking, laughing. All of his friends said he was in a really good mood, and he was a little drunk, which wasn't unusual. And basically around closing time, he left, and he left alone on foot.
Oh.
And before he left, he made plans with his good friend Neil, who was his coworker. They both like to ride motorcycles. And the next day was supposed to be really nice. So they made plans to ride together the next day. Okay?
Okay.
So at 2:06 in the morning, there was a surveillance camera that captured Hugues walking. And this was just steps away from his apartment.
Okay.
Okay, now I will show you what I found here. He lived at 462 Linden Street. So what I'm showing Elaine right now for everybody listening is a walking map in San Francisco from the nightclub that he was at, Underground SF, to 462 Linden Street, which is where his apartment was. So you can see it was a half a mile walk, which would have taken him about 10 minutes.
Yeah. Not far.
Not very far at all. So he left on foot by himself. He was seen at 2:06 a.m. on a surveillance camera, and he was still alone at that time. Okay. Fast forward to the next day. Neil, his friend that he had scheduled his motorcycle ride with, tried to call Hugues, but he could not get a hold of him. So he just assumed, Hugues was either hungover or decided he didn't want to go, sleeping in, whatever. So Neil went on the ride without him. And apparently he kept calling him like, hey man, I can't believe you're missing out on this. It's so nice out here. Call me back, etc. Now, meanwhile, other things are going on, but from Neil's perspective, Hugues didn't show up for work on Monday. And it was that point that he went over to Hugues' apartment and then noticed the yellow crime scene tape.
Oh.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's rewind. Now we're back to Saturday, before Neil is out riding.
Yeah.
A neighbor came outside. I forget what they're doing, getting the paper or something. They noticed Hugues' apartment. They noticed on the landing. So, it was his apartment. Then when you open the door, it was like a little landing and some stairs down.
Okay.
Like 3 to 4 stairs or something like that.
Okay.
And the neighbor noticed a lot of blood on the landing. Like it was really bloody. So that's when the neighbor called 911 around 8:20 in the morning. The police showed up and they went inside the apartment and they found Hugues laying face up, dead. And they said there was blood everywhere, like all over the inside of his apartment. Blood.
Whoa.
Yeah. And they said they had never seen so much blood. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
Gosh, where do I even go from here? Let's talk about Melissa Nix. Melissa Nix is Hugues' ex-girlfriend of 4 years.
Oh.
And even though that they had, ended their romantic relationship, they were still really good friends. And at this time, she lived on the East Coast, whereas Hugues was on the West Coast in San Francisco. So
Mhm.
at some point, she is notified that Hugues died.
Mhm.
So she freaks out, obviously. She calls the police department to see, to verify that he was in fact dead.
Mhm.
She flies from out east back to San Francisco.
Okay.
And she is frustrated because the San Francisco Police Department will not talk to her.
Oh.
Basically, they won't give her any information, and they didn't ask her any questions either about Hugues. Now, I guess I could understand that because she had been out of Hugues' life a little bit. I mean, they were still good friends, but she lived far away, and so they weren't like routinely in contact.
Right.
So anyway, she was frustrated that nobody would talk to her, so she calls up a crime reporter who said, well, are you guys going to report on this story? Because by the way, Melissa is a journalist herself.
Oh, okay.
So she calls up a local crime reporter, and she's told when she speaks to them, no, we're not going to report on that. We don't report on suicides. Yeah.
Does she know anything about the circumstances yet? Like all the blood?
So I'm not sure, but we're going to get into those.
Okay.
Okay. So,
okay, because this sure doesn't sound like a suicide, but
yeah.
I don't know.
So inside the apartment, as I said, there's blood everywhere. There's bloody handprints where it looks like he was grabbing onto the wall. There are bloody footprints which belong to him.
Wow.
It's almost as if he was like dragging himself in the apartment to different places, right? The TV was overturned and there was broken glass. And his watch was taken off and it was found underneath his body. He was laying on top of his watch. Okay.
Huh. That's weird. Okay.
One of the things they noticed about the blood, which they said could point to a suicide, which let's fast forwarding a little bit here. The San Francisco Police Department is trying to say this was a suicide.
Okay.
Whereas Hugues' family and friends don't believe it.
Right.
So that's the gist of this story.
Okay.
Anyway, they pointed to some blood that they found on the ground, and the blood, I guess, was like droplets of blood. And they said if Hugues was moving quickly, that the blood would have shown some like tails as if he was in movement, whereas it was just pure drops.
Oh.
Okay. Now I will admit the evidence is very strange. Okay. The first thing that's strange about this, the door was dead bolted from the inside.
Oh.
Now there was a back door to the apartment. It was also locked from the inside, but the back door was one of those push button locks.
Mm-hmm.
So you could technically lock it and then close it behind you.
Yeah.
But the front door was dead bolted. Okay.
Okay.
The only blood, the only hair and DNA found in the residence, according to the police department, belonged to Hugues. Something else very strange. There was no knife. Oh, now I should get to how he died. He was stabbed to death. He had 3 stab wounds, okay? One was in his abdomen. Okay. One was in his chest. And one was, by the way, the chest one punctured his lung, and one was in his neck. So all of these stab wounds obviously were very punctured very serious or very important things inside your body that you need to keep you alive.
Yes.
So that was the cause of death. Now, there was no knife found near his body. Okay.
Okay.
They took 2 knives that were in the kitchen, like in the sink.
Yeah.
And they tested those knives. There were no blood found on them. Now, the knives in the kitchen, they theorized, could have been used to stab him. In other words, yeah, that kind of knife could have made that injury.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no blood on those knives. And they weren't near his body. Okay?
Okay.
Another piece of evidence was the fact that it didn't look like Hugues had made any attempts to call for help because his cell phone was sitting, I guess, on a table, and there was no blood on the cell phone, or there was no record of him calling anyone.
Okay.
Okay. There was an autopsy performed, but they could not conclude whether these wounds were self-inflicted or if somebody else did it, because Hugues was right-handed, and the way that the knife went into his body could have fit with him stabbing himself.
Okay.
That's what they said.
Okay. So far, this is seeming very unlikely to be a suicide.
Yeah. Melissa Nix, who's his ex-girlfriend, calls his parents in France, which is, I think she called him like 4 days after he was found dead or something. I don't know exactly. Anyway, the point being is nobody called them to alert them that their son had been killed or that their son was dead. So Melissa was the one. She called his parents. They're in France.
Yeah.
She calls them at 4 a.m, lets them know that he died. They're obviously devastated. They come to the U.S. They don't buy that this was a suicide at all because he had no issues with mental health as far as they knew. He seemed happy, especially on the night that he went out with them. So they didn't believe it. The San Francisco police department say, well, it's possible that Hugues could have washed the knife after he killed himself, or he could have or stabbed himself, or he could have gone outside to bury the knife, which would explain the blood on the landing, which they think is complete. Obviously, they think it's crap.
Yeah. Was there a freshly dug hole outside?
Right. That's what my reaction. It sounds like complete garbage.
How are you crawling outside and digging a hole when you have a knife wound in 3 vital places in your body?
Yeah. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
No.
So basically, they were able to get French authorities involved because Hugues was an American citizen, but he also had French citizenship.
Okay.
And Hugues' father also hired a private investigator who believes that Hugues was murdered. Now, the reasons he gives are because starting with Hugues' walk home was not through the best of neighborhoods.
Oh.
So he theorized somebody could have followed Hugues. By the way, they said the motive wasn't robbery because nothing was stolen, by the way.
Okay.
But they thought maybe Hugues could have, somebody could have followed him, or he could have got into trouble that way on his walk home. Now, another thing that I think the San Francisco Police Department tried to say was, he probably bought drugs on his way home because he did go through an area where it wasn't that great. To quote, this is a quote from the private investigator, that any way he would have walked home after 2 a.m. would have had drug dealers, pimps, and hoes.
Wow.
That's what the private investigator said. His words, not mine. But basically, they theorized maybe not the private investigator, but the police, maybe he bought drugs and in a altered state of mind, he stabbed himself and either cleaned the knife or threw the knife somewhere.
Did they autopsy his body?
They did.
And did they find drugs in his system?
They did not.
So the cause of death was definitely knife wound.
Correct. Blood loss from his stab wounds.
Yeah. And they didn't find any other drugs or unusual stuff?
Other than some alcohol, they did not find any drugs.
Okay.
I mean, obviously he had been drinking that night and he was a little drunk, but he was clearly able to walk. By the way, here's another thing. He was able to walk home because he saw, he was seen on surveillance. They know he got into his place because obviously he was found there, but they also said after he got home, he had a bite to eat and he was surfing the internet for like some dating and sex websites.
Oh.
So he was home on his computer. Something else interesting, around 2:38 in the morning, which is shortly before the time that he's believed to have died, his neighbors heard they were woken up by some loud noises. One of which was the door opening and closing, his front door. And I think they also said they heard a loud thud.
Oh.
So they didn't go outside, I guess, to check on this. I mean, why would you if you just hear some doors slamming? But the neighbors did hear that.
They're probably used to him coming home late if he goes out to bars at night frequently. So,
right.
Maybe it's not that unusual.
And they did interview the neighbors, and all the neighbors agreed that Hugues they didn't believe he was suicidal. That he just was a seemingly happy guy. You know, he had money, he had a good job, girls loved him. So let's talk about one theory that they believe is possible to have happened.
Okay.
And I also tend to believe this. So Hugues dated a lot, and one of his really good friends said he really didn't care who he hit on. It could have been somebody with a husband. It could have been somebody with a boyfriend. He did not care if they were married. So one of the theories is that he really pissed off somebody's husband or boyfriend. Maybe that person came to his house, knocked on the door. Hugues opened the door for this person, and they had a confrontation. Hugues was stabbed, and they believe it's possible he was able to, either the person stabbed him and ran off, and he was able to get away from them, get inside, slam the door shut, and lock it.
Yeah.
But by that time, the person had taken off with the knife or whatever weapon. And then that would explain all the blood on the landing outside, like a confrontation with somebody. It would explain the locked door. As far as all the blood that was found, I think my personal opinion is that he was in shock from his wounds. And we've seen that happen before. So another case comes to mind. The case of, I think, Peter Porco. He was attacked with an axe. And after the killer left, him with his wounds, he's bleeding profusely. He got up and was doing things around the house that he would normally do. Like he was unloading the dishwasher, and he packed a lunch for himself, all while he's bleeding all over the place.
Wow.
So I think it's possible that Hugues was attacked outside, was able to get away, or the person took off. He locked the door to shield himself, but he was so in shock that he was literally just walking around trying to survive, which could explain they saw his handprints on the walls.
Yeah.
So I think he was so in shock it didn't occur to him to call for help. He just was functioning at that point.
That could be.
And then he succumbed to his injuries. So one of the things the French investigators did find was they said they found unknown DNA that did not belong to Hugues on his watch band.
Oh.
Now, if you remember, his watch band was found underneath him.
Yeah.
Underneath his body. And so his father believes that Hugues could have been using his right, because he always wore his watch on his right hand. And he said he could have been using his right arm to defend himself, and that somehow the watch came off.
That could be.
Yeah. And so the DNA on there belongs to whoever did this to him.
Yeah. That might be.
So he had a contusion on his forehead and his forearm, which could have been defensive wounds, they figure.
Yep, that would make sense.
So his father put up $100,000 reward for anyone with information about who could have done this. They don't believe it was a suicide, but believe it or not, it's still disputed. Some people think it's possible he killed himself. Some people believe there's no way. And I personally believe there's no way. But that's all the information on this case.
Why on earth is the police department so insistent on it being a suicide?
So they don't have to investigate it? I don't know. That's the only reason I can think.
Because this does not sound like a suicide. There's a lot of reasons it doesn't sound like a suicide. But just thinking statistically, how often do people commit suicide by stabbing themselves? I think with men, it's overwhelmingly by gunshot wound.
True. That's a good question. I actually don't know.
Stabbing yourself is so... I think that would be... It's such an unreliable way of killing yourself. So if you truly wanted to commit suicide, that doesn't seem realistic, I guess. Plus, I wonder how much investigation they did, because you can tell by the angle of the stab wound whether someone else was coming in, like, you know, from the top down, or whether you're coming in at yourself.
I don't know how they tell that.
Where I heard all this information, some other stabbing case that I have heard of in the past, but they study things like the angle of the wound, and they can tell whether it was inflicted by yourself or by someone else. So I wonder how much investigation they did into that.
Well, they did say that the medical examiner, whoever did the autopsy, you know, they confirmed there were no drugs in his system, but they did say, not that he did do it himself, but they said it was possible, theoretically, that he could have done it himself.
Okay.
Which,
all right.
I understand why he's saying that. I mean, he basically, there was no, I don't know. I think everything, go ahead.
But even if he did do it himself, the lack of a knife with blood on it is pretty damning evidence.
I agree.
He clearly didn't walk outside and bury it. It doesn't sound like they found a hole or a freshly covered area that was just a hole. They didn't find it in the garbage or in the sink.
They did find knives in the kitchen, but
they find knives in the kitchen, but they were clean.
They had no blood on them. They had no DNA on them at all. So that would mean that either the killer had to wash it off, or he washed it off himself if he did this to himself, which his girlfriend or his ex-girlfriend says, why on earth would somebody stab themselves and then wash the knife?
No. Yeah, I think that would be the last thing on his mind if he was trying to commit suicide.
Right.
He's not concerned about cleaning off the weapon.
You know what else? You know what else gets me?
What?
If somebody did this to him, which I believe somebody did, but this person would have had blood on them as well, based on how much blood there was at the crime scene.
Yes.
So it's like, where did this person go? They must have just, gotten away with it. Gone home, changed, whatever. And,
Yeah, that's scary.
It is kind of crazy. They didn't find any other DNA except for the little bit that the French team found on his watch.
That is very odd. Yeah.
Because even if I am not murdered, there's going to be other people's DNA. Like if you have somebody over, even their DNA is going to be there, right? Or do they have to?
Yeah, they find skin cells and hairs, and it's extremely hard, from what I know, my limited knowledge of forensic science, that it's extremely hard to not leave any evidence at all.
Or even, I'm sure he had girls over to his place. I mean, they would leave some DNA. So I don't know.
Just at this bar, maybe he made out with a girl and she touched his watch. And now there's going to be DNA on his watch.
That's a really good point.
He was just
I don't
out
know what kind of DNA
people.
Yeah, like dancing and
dancing with people. Like you're going to run your arm into other people. I think that's very likely to get other people's DNA on your.
That's a really good point. That's very true. I can also see the theory where he's got his arm up trying to shield himself from somebody as well,
Sure. And is it really possible for someone to stab themselves once and then stab themselves a second time, and then stab themselves a third time, all in vital locations. Do you really have that strength and that mental power to be capable of doing that to yourself 3 times in a row?
That's another really good question, Elaine. And the answer to that is I feel like it would hurt quite a bit.
Yes.
So you'd have to be really committed to what you were doing.
Yes.
There is one thing that I didn't mention.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of Harry Carey?
I'm not sure.
So Wesley told me about I asked him because it's a thing in Japanese culture. Apparently,
it sounds familiar, but I don't remember what it is.
Apparently, Hugues was a big fan of Japanese culture.
Okay.
And apparently, Harry Carey is a Japanese ritual suicide by disembowelment. And it was apparently something samurai did in their code of honor. And part of that is like stabbing yourself in the abdomen.
Oh.
And his ex-girlfriend. So this is kind of a weird part that I didn't understand about the 48 Hours episode, but the police said that his ex-girlfriend mentioned this, like, to them, saying, is it possible he did this like as like a Harry Carey, which is a Japanese honor suicide?
Yeah.
But they interviewed her and said, they're saying you were the first person to bring up suicide here. So what's the deal, basically? And she said that their questions were very leading towards suicide. And so anyway, at some point it came up that he was into Japanese culture. And that is something that's kind of related to Japanese culture.
Sure.
What he would have done to feel this dishonor or whatever is a mystery. And the ex-girlfriend says, she never said to them that she believes it was suicide. So, but it had to come from somewhere. But I don't know if that's likely. But I just thought I'd mention it because it was mentioned in the thing.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I can see the connection there, but it still feels very unlikely.
It feels like a reach.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it's odd that they are pushing so hard on this being a suicide. I feel like if they had explored it being a murder, then they might have sought out more evidence or found more evidence. Like how much murder investigation happened if
you know what else, though?
A suicide.
Nobody else was seen on surveillance. That's important.
That's true. So was the surveillance only at the front, though?
Yeah.
Because he had a back door.
There are also blind spots. I mean,
yeah.
It doesn't show Hugues' apartment. It shows like a little bit before it, I guess. But I think there's other directions. I think if I was looking at it, when I saw it, it didn't look like it was a full, like all-encompassing view of everything. It looked like there was a bit of there were areas where, somebody could have come from another direction, I think.
And this was just before his apartment, right? It wasn't like it didn't show his front door.
Correct.
So I feel like someone could have come in from another direction or from the back. The back is the more easily accessible one. If it was premeditated, someone wanted to murder him, then they might have done their research and figured out where they could get in without being on surveillance.
True, but also, how do you explain all the blood on the front door landing?
That's true.
Unless he went outside. That's how the suicide, like the people that think it was a suicide, think he just went outside.
Why?
Bled, and then, I don't know. That's just, I haven't seen a good reason for it.
Huh.
But everything to me points to, he was on dating and sex websites. You would think they would be able to find this information if he had planned to meet somebody. But I wonder, Could he have reached out to somebody he thought was going to come over for sex or something, and then it was not that person? Maybe it was that person's husband or boyfriend or something. They come over, knock on the door, they exchange words. He stabs them. He gets away from him, shuts the door, bolts it, and then dies.
Yes. They could have the confrontation on the front steps and then, gone inside. Like you said, he could have been disoriented and in shock.
Right.
And that would explain all the blood all over his house. And the blood marks did not appear as though he were running. They were just drips. So,
right.
Yeah.
To me, it feels like he was staggering around, kind of like confusedly, like in shock, just like, I don't like, he wouldn't necessarily be running. I mean,
no.
I think he could have just been slowly kind of bleeding and like in shock, like I don't know.
Right.
So I think he was murdered. And nobody's ever been arrested for it. And to this day.
Yeah. It feels like maybe they could have put more into the investigation had they considered it a murder.
Yeah. So that's the case of Hugues de la Plaza.
Wow.
2007.
That is upsetting.
Very upsetting.
It's more upsetting that there's still so much dispute over whether it was murder or suicide, and that I feel like there could have been more investigation had they considered it as a murder.
Agreed.
Because it does seem very plausible based on his lifestyle that it could be an angry boyfriend or husband who went after him.
I agree.
That would not be unusual.
I think that's likely, like he pissed off somebody by being too bold or something.
Yeah. Wow.
So if you know anything about the death of Hugues de la Plaza, you can contact the San Francisco Police Department at 415-574-4444. You can text a tip to 847-411.
Oh.
And you may remain anonymous if you wish to do so. So that's the story. Pretty bizarre. And, I just feel so bad for his family, because imagine getting that call at 4 a.m. and you're in Europe.
Yeah.
And then you have to sit on because it's San Francisco. It would have been you have to sit on a 10+ hour plane knowing your son is dead and you don't know anything about it.
Right. And knowing that it happened 4 days ago, and this is the first you're hearing of it.
Yeah, the police didn't even bother to call his parents. Like, what?
I realize they're in another country, but did they not search his cell phone and look for some contacts? That's odd.
It just feels like they took some things that said, oh yeah, well the door was locked and this and that, so he did this to himself. But it's not great work by them, because I just don't buy it, and neither does his family.
Right.
Or friends.
Understandably.
All right. Well, any last minute thoughts before we close it out, Elaine?
No, I don't think so. That was a nice change of pace for the cases that I guest host with.
Nice change of pace.
Yes.
What was so nice about it? Was it the brutal attack?
Nice is the wrong word. That was a change of pace.
It was a change of pace. You're right. So
from the disappearances.
So Elaine, that's 4 episodes of 1 minute and 43 seconds under your belt. Always a great guest. It's always great to have you here with us. Hopefully it's not the last time. I don't think it will be.
No.
But thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening. And we'll see you next time.
podcast has been approved by Skipper the Cat. Right, Skippy?